there, YouTube. It's your favorite Spice Girl, Grammar Spice. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the English language. If you studied Shakespeare in high school, maybe you thought it was a little hard to read because it was written in Old English. Well, if that's what you thought, I'm sorry to tell you that you're mistaken. Shakespeare was actually writing what scholars call modern English. Modern English? Wait a minute. So if that's modern, what's Old English?
At we gardena on jærdagum sead kynninga frymja frodnon hosa edelingas ellen fremedon. Oft kylkärting kärvena trätum manig of mätum medoset loftea heigas of the erle.
Well, I don't know if you went to the movies and saw Beowulf this fall, but if you did, Beowulf is written originally in Old English. Another name for it is Anglo-Saxon. Beowulf was probably written down around 750 A.D. In the middle of the 5th century, England started to experience a bunch of invasions from the Germanic tribes in Europe. There were Angles, Saxons, Jutes, who were Danes, and Frisians from Holland. These Germanic tribes launched successive waves of invasion of England, and as they came and stayed, the native Celts fled north. Their language is preserved today in Welsh and in Gaelic. We only have about 12 Celtic words in our English language today. You could divide the history of the English language up into 3 periods. Old English goes roughly from 450 A.D., when the Germanic invasion started, through 1066, when the next big invasion by the French began the Middle English period. On October 14, 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, fought the forces of King Harold of England, Harold Godwinson was his name, on the battlefield at Hastings. Legend tells us that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, poor King Harold was felled by an arrow to the eye. William, Duke of Normandy, became known as William the Conqueror. He took control of the British throne, and for the next 300 years, the English king spoke French. From 1066 onward through around 1400, the Germanic language began to blend with the French, Latinate French. French, don't forget, was carrying Latin almost like a Trojan horse. So when the Germanic language and the French language started to combine, because the nobles needed to speak with their serfs and with the native English, they formed a new branch of English called Middle English. If we look at the way it's spelled, the spelling will look more or less familiar to us, but its pronunciation was quite different. Quando April visi sugar sosa, the drusht of March has persis. This combination of French and German is a reason why the English vocabulary is so wide and varied. We really had 2 names for everything. Pork, for example, is Latinate, the way French would refer to it, and swine is more Germanic, and that's how the Anglo-Saxons would have called the same meat. Oh, you know, something you might think is kind of funny. You might think that you don't recognize very much in the Anglo-Saxon language, but here's a little gem. A lot of know and use, quite frequently, to the distress perhaps of your parents and teachers, words that have come to us across the centuries directly from Old English, Anglo-Saxon. And these would be your 4-letter body function words. They're thought of as crude now. Back then, I guess, to the Anglo-Saxons, they were just the names for the functions. But the French lords would have thought that they were quite lower class. So where the Anglo-Saxon might refer to his butt as his ass, the more delicate French lord might say derrière. The Anglo-Saxon might talk about a pain in his gut, whereas his French noble would refer to the same malady as a pain in his stomach. We had snot on the one hand, Old English, mucus on the other, Latin. And we had meats on the hoof, or generally Old English, like swine and cattle and deer. But the double vocabulary in English would show us that these same words had a more prepared version that would be pork instead of swine, beef instead of cattle, and venison instead of deer. It's a kind of rule of thumb that I use, that the closer to the body of the Lord, the more French the word. For example, his personal servants, his barber and his tailor, take their name from French and are Latin in their base, whereas the baker and the miller are from Anglo-Saxon. When you think about these professions, the baker and the miller would probably not even be in the same castle. They might be in a separate kitchen. The baker would be baking the bread out of wheat that he had gotten from the miller, who actually operated a little mill down by the river, grinding wheat into flour. They wouldn't have needed to communicate directly with the upper class, and their professions and their products come to us in Anglo-Saxon. Whereas the servants that needed to communicate with the Lord would be using language that was French, and their professions would be named in French. When you think about it, though, what happened is that the conquering French lords would have had children, and their children would have been raised knowing only England, and eventually they would start picking up the local language. That's probably how the language changed and blended. Kids were probably responsible for a lot of the changes in the English language, just the way they are now. From 1400 to 1500, we had a period called the Great Vowel Shift, where Middle English transitioned into what we now call modern. For example, if the poet were to say, "My name is Geoffrey Chaucer," in Middle English, before the vowel shift, it would sound like this: "Me nama is Geoffrey Chaucer." After the vowel shift, after 1500, in Shakespeare's time, it would be more like, "My name is Geoffrey Chaucer." So me became my, nama became name, and Chaucer became Chaucer. The shift was away from the continental French into a pronunciation more typical of English itself. Since Shakespeare was writing in the late 1500s, he was writing in modern English, even though it was in Elizabethan form, which has many words and word endings that we don't use today. Shakespeare's plays probably aren't pronounced today the way he wrote them, but they're a lot closer to what we speak than the Middle English of Chaucer or the Anglo-Saxon of the poet of Beowulf. Well, I hear the bell now, so that's all we can do with the history of the English language for today. But I'll see you next time. Hope you'll tune in for our next lesson. Don't forget, give me a grade. Hope I deserve your highest. Or I can live with a B plus probably. But don't give me anything lower than a B plus, please. Oh yeah, one more thing. No homework.